Okay, this video is all about how I got through all of that reading in law school. Because it is not like any other. So the first thing I did before reading a case, if I read the case, I often did not read a full case. But the first thing you want to do is get the big picture, right? Get orientated. What is this case about? And you can, of course, start with a case brief. Those are usually helpful. Sometimes they won't always relate to specifically what you're studying in class. Online videos, same thing. Any study aids that you are using and paying for, take full advantage. But my absolute favorite, if it existed, is always the dissent, because it has to summarize the majority opinion to tell you why it's wrong. And because it's always shorter than the entire case, it cuts through a lot of BS. Because you will get cases where judges just want to blah, blah, blah and tell this big fish story. And it's always like that case from Alabama in the 1800s, and it's hard to read anyway. So this is extremely helpful. And once you do this, you generally have an idea of what the hell is going on in this case. So the second thing I do is I pay very close attention to what is relevant to class. So this includes when you're in class, you really need to know what lecture is focusing on. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but you will get cases that are covering multiple areas of law, and not all of them will be relevant to what you are learning in class. And that's okay. So just pay attention to that and really focus on what your professor spends time on, because that is likely going to be on the exam. What your professor is interested in is very relevant to you. So then the third thing I do, which is very helpful for achieving number 2 and being prepared for class, it's how I divided my notes. So I'm sure you've all heard of IRAC, which is issue, rule, application, conclusion. And this is like a different way of thinking, but that's not always relevant to note-taking. And I mean that specifically because you're trying to understand the case. I always did issue, of course, right? And then the rule. And these two are really important, right? Because the issue is the legal question before the court, and it is always quite narrow. And this is critical to understanding the big picture and knowing what's relevant to your class. The rules, which there can be more than one, is the applicable law. And I know you may be like, well, isn't the legal question and applicable law the same thing? No. And here's why. You can have multiple laws that relate to this question. So you may have more than one, and you may have more than one legal question, of course, but again, what's relevant to class? So then I always want to know the facts. And especially if you ever write about this case, the facts are really important for A, because it's how the law applies to the given situation. And you can do these, chronologically or per rule, right? Per applicable law, however you want to organize it for you. Sometimes it's a lot easier on an exam to do it per rule. That's how it makes it easy for your grader to give you the most points. Okay, so you've got the issue, rules, facts. I always love to know the claims. These are the legal arguments from each side. And this will really help you with analysis in the future. And so then C, conclusion. When you're reading a case, that is the holding, which is what the court decides, and their reasoning, why they made that decision. Now, when I'm reading a case, if I've done this and this before I start the case, I'll usually start here. I want to know what the court decided before I get into the weeds. I'll read one, and I'll read this first, right? Because these things are often really hard to find because judges tend to be terrible writers. And that makes it really hard for you. And that's why it is important to organize your notes so you know what they said. Now, my bonus tip for today is to write down your questions on your notes that you bring to class and actually ask them. I don't care if you ask in class in front of everybody or your study group or your friend or anywhere, but ask your questions because that really helps with complete understanding of a case. All right, law students, I hope this helps. Good luck out there.